Good evening, my people. It is I, Legion, and I've come to give you another one of my fireside chats. I've got myself a General Grant cigar here. We've got some Buffalo Trace whiskey, and we're here to get into the topics. So, just to start off our note for this evening, I just wanted to let you all know that I took some of your advice. This time I actually wrote down some notes, so if you'll notice my phone sitting on my lap, that is going to be feeding me some of my notes so I can ensure that I'm providing you as accurate information as possible. I want to try to eliminate as many stutters as I can, but the thing I do want to ensure with this broadcast is that I like the idea of keeping it, unscripted, off the cuff sort of thing, because again, the entire point of a fireside chat is for us to have a conversation. I mean, my real goal here is, I want it to feel like we're having a conversation, we're talking it out, and I want to be giving you my unfiltered opinions as to what's going on, and a variety of other topics as well, and we'll be delving into some of those today. So, going ahead and starting it off. Sorry for the burp there. Just to go ahead and start it off, we'll go ahead and jump right into some current events. After that, we'll go ahead and delve into a little bit of philosophy. So stay tuned for that. Now, starting it off, just giving my brief opinion of some current events that we have going on. So, North Korea's been in the news. Go figure. I actually can't remember a single week where they don't show up in the news once. Well, anyway, so today they were showing off some missiles for the, if I recall correctly, it was the 100th anniversary of, it was a holiday. I'm sorry, I cannot remember off the top of my head, but I remember reading it. But it was some sort of celebration they were having today where they test fired some rockets, and those rockets ended up failing. And if I recall, those rockets were in response to us moving some of our ships into what they would consider their sea space, or we essentially moved into a position where if North Korea decides to get a little frisky, we can get a little frisky right back, and they don't like that very much. So as far as my whole opinion on the North Korea thing, it boils down to good. I think they deserve what they get if they threaten our allies or us, and especially with South Korea being right there, that's a big thing. Am I worried about their nukes being able to hit us? I'm not. North Korea does pose a threat, though I do think they are a little underdeveloped to fight wholesale against the United States. But really we have to be careful, and that's one of those things. It's really a precautionary measure that we are moving those ships into that area, and it's really kind of a, hey, stop it. Now, do I think North Korea is going to stop? No. As a matter of fact, they released a statement essentially declaring that is an act of war, and they can think of it what they want. But if they weren't acting so crazy, and this obviously doesn't go for the entire North Korean people. I don't feel like I need to state that, but sometimes, But regardless, they require a delicate handling, but at the same time we can't not respond to their threats with threats of our own, because we're not going to let them walk all over us, essentially, is what I'm getting at with the whole North Korea situation. And frankly, I would be entirely, I'm not saying a preemptive strike against North Korea. I want them to do something first. But my whole theory of war, for anybody who knows me, my big theory about warfare, and it's not really a theory, but it's just my philosophy of it, is absolute overwhelming force. We're gonna make General Sherman who's one of my heroes. For those of you who talk to me, know that you have to make war hell, and you have to deliver overwhelming force. And essentially, I don't like the idea of going to war, but if we're going to go to war, I want it to get over as soon as possible. How do you end a war as soon as possible? Direct application of absolutely overwhelming force. And now I'm not saying we're going to go out there and commit atrocities or anything like that, but I want the ability to shut them down as quickly as possible. So that's just my philosophy on that. If North Korea decides to be the first ones to strike, I want us to crush them. That's what I want. And you know, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a big fan of war. I think war is terrible. But the reality of the situation is if somebody else is going to start it, I really sincerely hope that we are the ones who finish it, and we finish it in as quick and as fast a way as we can. All right, so moving on from that, one of the requested topics was for me to briefly go over the military-industrial complex. Now, that's always an interesting question. Now, for those of you who do not understand the military-industrial complex, essentially the military-industrial complex is a collaboration between the military and the technology developers and the weapons developers and the arms companies to essentially work together to influence political action, to influence political goals and whatnot like that. Now, my big thing is as far as the military-industrial complex goes, it doesn't surprise me that you would see collusion like that. I think it's clear, it's something that you see, and for those of you who don't know, the military-industrial complex term came from Dwight D. Eisenhower, President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his farewell address, as something to be concerned with. And it is something to be concerned with because essentially you have arms companies and the military working together to influence political goals. Now, that is worrying. Do I necessarily think that it's always a bad thing? Not necessarily. It would depend on the situation, and I like to take everything as a case-by-case basis on whether or not it's bad. I don't believe that there's really anything you can say is 100% bad when it comes to that collusion. It is definitely worrying, but it can also be positive. So that's just one of those things that you have to take into consideration. Now, as far as any specific things that you could tie to that, I don't have anything that I know off the top of my head. I'd have to do more research on that. But that's just my opinion is it's definitely something that you have to be worried about, you have to be mindful of, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be something devious or bad that you're going to see from that sort of industry. And I see a lot of people kind of throw that term around without really understanding, you know, what the whole point of it is. So just something to keep your mind out for. You always want to keep an eye on topics such as that. But like I said, it's not always bad. So moving on to something a little bit bigger, we got the MOAB. MOAB dropped in Afghanistan to collapse some tunnels, and I saw the posts. I saw the posts of the people who were definitely not okay with us dropping that bomb. And I'm going to say this, and I'll be very brief with this one. I'm completely for the MOAB strike on those tunnels, those ISIS tunnels. And the big thing is you have to realize application. Why haven't we dropped a MOAB before, right? Well, you have to think. The MOAB was designed, it is designed to cause that shockwave that can collapse those tunnels. So this is really one of those situations where to strike these tunnels, that was the perfect weapon for the job. And I've seen all the posts of the people comparing this to like a nuclear strike and whatnot, and I think that's really unfair. Whenever you bring nukes and the MOAB up in the same conversation, I feel like you're being a little disingenuous. A nuke and a MOAB are not the same thing. Not even remotely close to the same thing. And not only that, but you also have to think, how many bombs have we dropped before we dropped one MOAB? Does the size of the bomb really matter? Because we've dropped many, many little bombs. Many, many, all over the place. But now you're seeing all this talk about, oh, okay, this one big bomb. This is the one that's the problem. And I genuinely disagree with that, especially in this one instance where it was literally used for the application that it was intended for. And besides that, I'm going to say I find the MOAB to be a very, very impressive piece of technology. I can't wait for the day when we design something bigger than that. Now, we can always go nuke if you want to go bigger, but obviously that has a lot of political and social ramifications, and I'd really rather us not start dropping nukes on people, because that goes to hell quickly. Once one is thrown around, many more are thrown around. So no, I'm not exactly for nuclear war. Despite my love of wasteland and those sorts of events. So that's just my point of view on that. Next thing up, We got the whole United Airlines scandal. So for those of you who do not know, what happened with United Airlines, essentially they overbooked a flight, or from, okay, so they didn't overbook the flight. What had happened is the flight was filled up. They filled it up, the entire flight, and then they wanted to throw some of their employees on the flight so that way they could get to work the next morning in a different airport. So essentially they offered out money to the passengers to leave the flight, and paying customers who had already been sat down, they offered them money to leave, and eventually they decided that they were going to pull random seat numbers and those people would have to leave. Well, what you had is you had a Dr. Dow who had patients that he was going to attend to that following morning, according to what he said, who needed to be on that flight, and he was one of the random people who was brought up, so he refused to leave his seat. Next thing you know, security, from the videos that we saw, bashed his head into the armrest and then dragged him off the plane. And for those of you who have not seen that, I suggest looking it up. It's pretty gruesome. They were definitely not nice handling that situation. And essentially, after this entire situation, you saw United Airlines stock drop by 1.4 billion. The owner of United Airlines, who initially praised their employees, eventually said that it was a heinous act and that it shouldn't have happened. And really, they had to have seen that coming. You don't treat a paying customer who had already turned in his ticket, boarded the flight, was in his seat. You don't treat them like that. I'm sorry, but your employees can wait. They don't need, no. The customer comes first. And anybody who's worked in retail can tell you that's the first thing they teach you. The customer's right, the customer comes first. And that was a really bad move on the fault. That was a really bad move on United Airlines turf, and they're going to be facing a lawsuit from it as well. So really, I don't think it's undeserved. From the information we've been given, they messed up. That's the end of that. They messed up, and they're going to get what's coming to them as far as that goes. And like I said, their stock's already dropped 1.4 was it billion or million? Now I'm messing that up. I'm pretty sure it was billion. Regardless, it was a lot. So we'll see what comes out of that. So that about rounds up the news segment. Sorry, I'm getting a little loud. I got my microphone in one spot, so I'm trying to keep my voice steady, but I get excited. So moving on to the next spot, I just wanted to go over some philosophy with y'all, and let you know what exactly is going on in my head. So excuse me for a minute. Enjoy the music while I relight this. I know I'm not supposed to be using these lighters, but I'd rather not bust out a match at the moment. Quick little relight. So for those of you who do not know, with cigars, you're generally not supposed to use a butane lighter, mostly because it affects that flavor of that initial draw. Granted, it was a relight, so I wasn't too worried about it, but that's just something you keep in mind whenever you're smoking a cigar. So, jumping into that philosophy portion, one thing I always wanted to mention is I actually read a fantastic graphic novel. Now, I'm not a graphic novel person, but I found a fantastic graphic novel by the name of Transhuman. Now, Transhuman is an interesting story where it tells about the evolution of man from man to post-man, or post-human, from human to post-human, there we go. And transhuman being the in-between between that point. So you see that in a lot of works of fiction, like the cyberpunk trilogies, and whatnot like that. So, or Johnny Mnemonic, that's another one. Deus Ex, and whatnot. So that was one of those interesting things where Transhuman went through that entire process, but it went through it from a very interesting business perspective. You had these two rival companies, one focusing on the genetic modification side, the other focusing on the mechanical augmentation side, and they were kind of clashing in a business sense. And it really brought up this really interesting paradigm where, at the end of the day, both of these companies, they don't necessarily end up going under, but they run a variety of tests, and eventually they get it to a point where humans can fly and they can do all these crazy things with these augments, but really the only augmentations that the humans really wanted was ones that would extend their life. And so they actually had a bunch of test monkeys that they were working on. And these test monkeys actually grew into the post-humans that humanity was supposed to become, because humanity was so focused on prolonging their own lives versus improving their capabilities. And I found that to be extremely interesting. Now, granted, it is a graphic novel, but that's something you see a lot nowadays, especially everybody's worried about death. And I think, while I do consider death to be something that you should think about, and I feel like that's one of those things that everybody should sit down and really take the time to realize, yes, one day you are going to die, and your time is limited. So it's what you do with your life that really matters. Should we be so worried about death that we focus on prolonging our own life, or should we focus on our outstanding accomplishments? Should we focus on pursuit, advancing the human condition, becoming better? I feel like that's what's really, really important when you're talking about the future of humanity, because we won't last if we don't improve. You know, we may still be around, but if we don't improve, something will eventually overtake us. And I find that to be so very interesting, that so many people are so worried about death that it eats into their lives, and they're so worried about taking those risks that they don't proceed. They don't become something better. Instead, they just, oh, well, this is guaranteed to prolong my life, or this is, if I don't do that activity, then maybe I'll live a bit longer, you know. Now, I'm not saying that you can use the acceptance of death to justify awful behavior, but at the same time, you know, you have to accept death, and all the great philosophical works always state that, you know, you have to accept your own mortality to grow as a person. If you don't, then you're just going to constantly be worried about it, constantly be wallowing in it. It'll eat you up inside. So I just found that to be extremely interesting, and something that I definitely did not expect from a graphic novel of that sort. And that's definitely a topic that I want to get into later on. For those of you who do not know, I would consider myself a transhumanist. So for what a transhumanist is, essentially, I fully believe that humanity, we're kind of past the point of biological evolution. We are past that point. Our brains have developed to the point where we no longer require biological evolution to succeed in life. We are essentially good as is. So the only way we're going to evolve in the future is through technology, using our brains to create things that make us better as people and improve our capabilities. And you can see that throughout history, where you could say that we today are more evolved than those in 1000 BC, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome. You know, while they were capable of a great many things, you could even say that the ancient Romans were more advanced evolution, or were more evolutionarily advanced than the Egyptians. So it's essentially the entire idea of transhumanism is using technology, or seeing technology as an evolution of the human condition, which I definitely buy into that philosophy of we are constantly evolving through our creations. Now, does that mean that eventually our creations may become better than we are, and we will become obsolete? It's a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. I don't think that it's something that we need to really worry about, because I don't feel like AI or anything like that will ever be put into a position where it would be non-beneficial to work with humanity. But it's just something to think about. And we definitely, I could say, we today are even better evolutionarily, quote unquote, than we were in the 80s, and that's because our technology has improved so much that the average everyday person is capable of so much nowadays, that I really do think that that is how we are evolving as a species, is we are evolving through our creations, through technology. And so that's something I want to just bring up with all of you today. So bringing that up, I did have a book recommendation for those of you today, so allow me to retrieve it from the shelf. So, for those of you who do not know, I do love to read, and so one of these things I'm going to try to do on every show now is to just go ahead and give you a book recommendation of the week. So what we have this week was actually, I met the guy at Wasteland Weekend who wrote this story, and I've been a big fan of it ever since I read the first one while I was in the field, and I just bought the second one in the series, and apparently he's going to be releasing a third shortly. But I met him at Wasteland Weekend. He's a great guy. He runs a website called Will It Wasteland, and he's an absolutely fantastic author. Once I started reading his book, I absolutely could not put it down. So for those of you who have not met this guy, I highly recommend that you check him out. His name is Emmy Jackson. Emmy Jackson, and he wrote a book called Empty Cradle: The Untimely Death of Corey Sanderson. Absolutely fantastic story. It's like I said, as soon as I picked it up, I could not put it down, and I'm already working on the second book. So his second book is called Empty Cradle, Shiloh in the Circle, and it's a fantastic piece of post-apocalyptic fiction. And the big thing that I like about it is it focuses on a sort of slow apocalypse. So essentially, there's no major event that causes the world to end. Instead, it's a very slow degradation of humanity through a disease, and without spoiling anything, essentially that disease causes very, very few pregnancies to actually be viable. So humanity begins to, or it causes essentially, once you catch this disease, you can no longer have a viable pregnancy. So essentially what happens to humanity is they shrink drastically over a period of time. And so it's a not only a delve into that post-apocalyptic fiction, how would this society run, but it's an interesting look into how also would they rebuild. And so that's something I'll highly recommend it till the day I die. And Emmy Jackson, if you do read this, I really enjoy your story. So keep up the good work, and I will be picking up your third book whenever it comes out. So that about rounds up our topics for today. I'm glad to have you all here. I'm glad for those of you who were on that live stream that I did shortly before recording this. And again, all of you have a fantastic evening, and make sure that you have a happy Easter as well. Thank you all. Listen up. I've got something for you. You know, your days, they're long. You go through Monday through Sunday, and sometimes you're just dragging. And I promise you, I'm going to give you a little something to go ahead and brighten your spirits. Every Sunday, we have this fireside chat. And it's just a brief look into not only my mind, but it's a conversation between me and you personally. Yes, you behind that computer screen. And now all you have to do to get notified whenever there's a new fireside chat is to go ahead and follow me at facebook.com/PraterLegion. You can also follow me on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button. Remember, if you like or dislike this video, go ahead and click those down below and leave a nice little comment for me to check out. Again, subscribe, and I'll catch you all later.